Good morning, and welcome to Real Human Design Stories, where we share real-life stories of how human design has helped our guests know themselves on a deep, transformative level. Whether you're joining us live here during Sunday Story Hour in my Facebook group or catching this on your favorite podcast platform on Mondays, you'll be able to find all the details you need in the show notes or the Facebook comments. Human design helps us to differentiate between what is ours and what is conditioning. By knowing and trusting ourselves, we develop deeper, more honest relationships and unlock our true gifts. I'm Kathy Bashanko, and my guest this week is Amber Clements, a rare 1-3 reflector right angle cross of the four ways. And I am super excited to talk to Amber today. I have met Amber in person at the Human Design Conference in Colorado that those of you who have heard, I just found out I've been invited to present at this year, so more on that as it evolves. But great to see you again, Amber, and thank you for getting up so early. Amber is in Australia, so I am doing this later than normal, and she's up ungodly early to talk to us here today. So thanks, Amber. I'd love for you to just say hello and then dive right into telling everyone about your human design story.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Kathy. And yes, it is a little early. I've had some coffee, so I'm hoping I'll pump into it straight
Right.
into it. So my story. I came across human design back. Just trying to think of how many years ago. About 6 or 7 years ago, probably closer to 7 now. And when I found human design, it was by accident. I wasn't looking for it. I had no idea it was out there. And
Were you surprised?
I was.
It was a reflector joke.
Yes, absolutely. Like beyond surprised, but surprised, but absolutely not at the same time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure.
So a friend of mine did a chart for me. He said, "Oh, you've got to look at this thing." And she did a chart actually through Chaitan's website, and it didn't come through. Yeah, Chaitan Parker. So it didn't come through. So she said, "Look, I'll email it." And I'm like, "Yeah." So I got an email from her with this information. She says, "Oh my goodness, you're really unique," which was interesting. I'm like, "Yeah, sure, we're all unique, aren't we?" And then eventually I had an opportunity to read the report about what it meant to be a reflector. There's a little bit of detail in there. And I just remember this moment that I suddenly felt so seen, so not just so seen, but almost like somebody had been watching me throughout my life and had kind of captured my experiences and put it into a document and was having a bit of a laugh, So absolutely surprised. It was like everything made sense. The difference that we feel sometimes that, at odds with everybody else or just having a very different life experience, it just all made sense. So it's this really deep knowing, but surprise at the same time, but a beautiful surprise.
For those who don't know, the signature emotion for reflectors is surprise. That was why I made the surprise joke, but it's surprise is the positive and then disappointment, the negative. So anyway, continue. I just wanted
No, that's great. And it definitely was the positive experience. And, I know some people, when they find out about being a reflector, it feels really heavy because, there's a lot about difference there and how we operate. But for me, it was just a sense of I've been operating in a similar way to what it was describing, but I'd come across a lot of, stubborn brick walls with others and their expectations of me and how life expected me to show up. But I'd honoured myself a lot in what was right for me. So it was really interesting when I was reading about what that.
So you already took a long time to make decisions and stuff for yourself?
As a 1-3 reflector, for me, I discovered it when I was in my Uranus return. So I'd had a life of bumping into things. I'd traveled a lot. I'd had lots of different careers. I'd really shifted myself. So I kind of learnt things naturally. So some of the things that I was doing were already, in that slow processing, knowing that I can't work. I'd been sprouting to many people for years before that. We can't all work, but, doing this 40-hour work week, having to show up and be consistent, it's not healthy. We need to work from home. We need to have a bit more balance.
What were some of the careers? I know that you were doing some sort of comedy, right? What was one of the things I remembered hearing you did some kind of.
Oh, yeah. So I started my career. So I from about the age of 14, I worked as a professional actor. In other words, I got paid to act, and that was, for me, I was always going to be an actress. That was kind of, it felt aligned. I got to play many different parts, and I could, have that kind of life experience. So when I left school, I worked in a show. It was like a cowboy and western stunt show, magic show. I played a lead. The lead female role which was like, I don't know if you've seen the movie Maverick with Jodie Foster and Mel Gibson, but it was a bit of a spin-off of that.
Okay. It's so long ago, I really don't remember anything significant about it, but go on. Someone will.
But anyway, I'm wearing big dresses, back in, the 1800s, and lots of exciting things happened. So it was a magic stunt comedy acting piece. So I did that for a number of years, and that was wonderful. I really got to learn a lot. I got to be doing the thing I loved. But what I found was I would find myself going, well, this is lovely. Now, what next? What next? So I evolved into moving into becoming a teacher from that space. I had an accident, hurt my back, couldn't continue doing the stunts, and sort of went back to uni and became a teacher. And I'd always been a teacher in some respect. Even when I was at school, I was the director of certain, shows. I'd done lots of stuff in that space. So for me to teach was really natural. And I have a lot of colourful, I was working for about 7 years as an actress in shows. I did some TV. I did a lot of voiceover work. I really enjoyed it. To be honest, I look back now and I think I probably should have just stayed in that space, because it was, for a reflector, you work hard for, spots of time. You get to show up, reflect, be diverse in who you show up as, and then you get to go away and have downtime. For me, my energetic demise was when I got too caught up in that ambitious aspect of the race. We've got to be someone, we've got to be more, we've got to earn more, we've got to step into that. So around 30, I'd been teaching, so I went back and became a high school teacher. I was teaching drama and film and English. And around 30, I thought, well, this can't be it. There's more. So I went back and did my third degree in communications. I thought I'd watched a little bit too much of Sex and the City, and for some reason thought I was going to be Samantha, not because of her antics. Let me just say that. But I just loved the way she held herself and was a strong, capable woman. And anyway, in her work. So I went back and studied that. Long story short, I didn't end up working in that space for long. I got caught up in the corporate world of project management, change management, and that was my career for the next 10 years or so. But what I found is the more I worked in that corporate space, the more I was sitting at a desk job, the more I was having to show up 40 plus hours a week, the more I was kind of pulled in, the more I got caught up in it, and the more I felt almost trapped in a lot of ways. And I remember vividly kind of peaking in my career. I mean, the thing about being a reflector, I think when you're really showing up as yourself in a lot of ways, I mean, I know energetically I was overdoing it, but I was never a pushy person. I was never once somebody that felt that I could go in there and represent myself in a way that says, you need to employ me, I need to, I'm the best at this, or I've got this going. I would just show up and be authentic. I would just show up and say, well, this is what I can do. This is what I can't do. And there was always something. I'd find that every job interview I went for, I got. And to the point that I was having all sorts of job offers. And so I get caught up in that, what's the best thing to do? What's going to bring me more money? What's going to give me more power? I kind of got caught up into that trap. And finally, I got to the best paying job, the biggest responsibility, the most prestigious title, and did, after a while, apart from the people that I worked with that I loved, it just felt like Groundhog Day. I was walking to work in the morning because I used to walk in and, to get exercise, and just thinking, is this it? Is this life? Is this all I'm going to be doing? Have I reached the peak? Which I was very lucky. That was about the year I found human design. And discovered that, human design really for me was about honouring the fact that I didn't want to be caught up in this in this kind of ambitious working way of life, or showing up and having to be consistent in what I do. I love that I can be flexible. I love that I can kind of really ebb and flow with what shows up where I'm supposed to be.
I love that you say, I don't want to have to be ambitious, yet through human design, you have written a book, started a college. Those are pretty ambitious things to do, right?
Yeah, it's interesting you said that, because I have reflected on that myself, because people have said that before. And I haven't done those things with an intention that I'm doing them for any other reason than alignment. And that is what, for me, is the difference between that intention, like that mind going, this is what I'm going to do and this is how I'm going to get there, and the flow. So the book, for example, I'd already started writing some things and it just turned into a book. I had no plan to write a book. What really gets me these days is when somebody will send me an email and say, who's a reflector, who will have read the book and said, thank you so much. You changed my life. You gave me hope, or you were inspiring me to know that, I can have a great life. Life doesn't have to be difficult, or I'm seen, or whatever it is that I hear from somebody that's read the book. And to me, it's like, that is why I wrote the book. I didn't even write it intentionally for any other reason other than I felt called to. The words kind of came on the page. It felt right. But for me, it's less about I've written a book and more about people. Somehow I've helped somebody. Somehow I've given somebody else just enough courage or information that they can serve themselves. So it's the same thing with the teaching. I've always been a teacher in some capacity. I started teaching little kids when I was just out of school, high school teacher, worked as a corporate teacher in the change management space, writing curriculum, writing adult education. So I've spent a lot of time in the teaching field. So for me, teaching is where I feel like I thrive, because it's really about the students. I really feel when I'm sharing what I know, I actually help others bring out what they know and what they need to know and see them on their journey. So it feels less about me trying to be something and more about holding space for others to be on their own journey. So I guess in that way, and it's the same with, other things that I'm doing at the moment. It's just what kind of comes, what are people asking for? What shows up in my field as a reflector? And then giving myself time to really feel into that. Does that feel honoring? Does that feel correct for my energy? Does that feel right for me? And after that processing, if it's a yes, that's kind of feels like the next step. It just feels like the next step. And that's for me what the giving yourself time as a reflector to process. And what's really interesting, and I've spoken to a lot and worked with a lot of reflectors and talked about this, is when something comes along, a decision to make, that is really aligned to where we're already going, and someone comes in and says, do you want to do this, or let's do this, or how about this? And you're already walking on that journey. It doesn't feel like there's a decision to make.
Yeah, I've noticed that. I've had several people who I've spoke to as reflectors. Like I've only had one reflector on the podcast besides you, and that was Lindsay Tucker, who was at the last conference. Did you meet her there? Were you at this last one?
I didn't. I wasn't there. That was
the one before that I met you at. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so when I approached her after her presentation and I said, I really loved her talk, and I said, I'm really interested in possibly having you come on the podcast. And she said that very same thing and I said, but I know, because I said to take your time, and I have an emotional wave too. We'll touch base, whatever, but I wanted to put it out there. She's like, oh, this is very aligned with what I want. And I was just kind of surprised by that. And then I found the same when I've talked to other reflectors about things where it's, it's not that you can't decide anything without waiting the 28 days, the lunar cycle, right? I am wondering, so that part you said wasn't new to you, like the idea of you needing to take time. What was the hardest part for you in when you started to actually try to live according to your design? What was?
Other people. Other people there's two things. First of all, being able to honor yourself, but that impacts other people generally, because if you need more time, you need to take pressure off. If you're in a partnership of some sort, that impacts them. If you've been doing, you've been doing a lot and been very active in, and overdoing and not maybe honoring yourself as a reflector, then suddenly having to take a little of that load off and expect others to step up, that can be hard. That can be an adjustment for others. Mm-hmm. I know for me, the moments that I started to call in what I needed or just say no, because that wasn't something I often would say. I would take on the responsibility for everything a lot of the time. And when I would start to say, I can't do that, people would come up against me and I'm talking family, friends, almost like I announced I was going to start World War III, really, what? Really finding that difficult because I'd been so accommodating a lot of my life, and been so thoughtful. And so for the moment when I had to start going, well, I'm going to put my needs at this point in time first. And that's really so I can actually be a better person for everyone anyway. But, when you start doing that was the hardest thing, because people suddenly it's like you change.
Yeah. We teach people how to treat us. And then when all of a sudden we say, oh, just kidding, that's really not the way I'm supposed to be. And now I'm going to be different. It takes people some time to get used to it. And some of them are obviously going to say, yeah, I don't like this new person. But the majority of them just need that adjustment time. And one of the things I noticed that, in that same process is at the beginning, it was so hard for me to do that, to say, no, this is what I need. And I was so I'm going to look out for my own needs. And then I realized I was doing it in this way that I was kind of almost expecting them not to have needs that might contradict. And so when I finally got to the point where I was like, oh, this is what I need. You can do whatever you want, and it doesn't define me. It doesn't give me, I don't need you to validate it. I don't need you to be okay with it. You can go do whatever you want, whatever. And, hopefully we still have our relationship, whatever it is. But that was a huge, and, did you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I do things now and I can feel, the trouble is I can feel the judgment, or even now, when I say, the expectation, the resilience from other, whatever it is the others are feeling, but I do it in spite of that when I know that it's what I need. And, when the little, sometimes the sly comments like, oh, you're not really working. Well, I probably work more hours than you because I'm working all the time because I've got my own business rather than, you know what I mean? But I don't feel the need to say that. I don't feel the need I don't like that. That's their expectations. That's how they feel. I just sit and leave that. I let them be in their judgment, but I don't.
I hope that I never feel like I'm working another day of my life because, if we really enjoy what we're doing, it doesn't feel like work, right? So
exactly. Exactly. And that's the beautiful thing, right? There's the fulfillment that comes from that service that we do.
So how long were you aware of your human design before you started studying it to do readings and teach and stuff?
I think it was about 2 years. I'd started to dabble in it, but I didn't officially start reading it until I felt very competent and comfortable with it. And that's my 48 as well in there, and liking to, really know it before I stepped into it. And that was good for me because it gave me a lot of time to process and to really feel into it. It's funny as well, I think, people, the reason I actually even started doing it is people would come to me and say, I'd like you to do my chart. And I'm like, oh, I'm not sure I'm ready yet, And that's that. I often find that expectation that people have of you. Let me share a story as an example of when I was a very young child that I was thinking about this the other day. My mother had always said I was the oldest child. I was very knowledgeable. I was kind of like, she used to say I held I held the energy of the family together. It was all about me, and I think it was just because I was holding their separation together and what have you. But she always thought I was tough and resilient. So there's this expectation as a reflector that you are whatever they're seeing within you. And so when she sent me off to school, she thought I'd be fabulous. I'd get in there and I'd be this confident little thing. And she said the day she picked me up, she said that the teacher had said I'd hidden behind the door for the whole morning. I'd felt, and it's that thing around there's an expectation that people have on who you are. And then there's who you are, as we all know, that's a deeper layer than that. And I think sometimes when we're with others and their expectation, there's things that we can live up to and there's things that we can't. And sometimes as a reflector, it's about trying to navigate which is the real me and which is the me, which part, to admit that I was actually a bit shy. Even to this day, I'm way more comfortable in a crowd than I am, like as in talking to a crowd, than I am having to do, say, one-on-one networking with people I don't know. And it's not that I can't do it, but
they say, in traditional human design, they talk about the protective nature of the aura of the reflector, that the reflector has this Teflon aura. It doesn't really absorb and amplify the energy the way that other people's open spaces are. And my experience has been that a lot of times that means that many reflectors, not that I've talked to that many, but, they're only 1%. There are times I notice that reflectors don't really let anybody in, right? And I don't know whether do you think that's an aware choice, or is that just an energetic feeling that we get from them?
I think it's I don't know about the energetic feeling. I can't speak to that, but I can speak to the fact that in my experience with talking with a lot of reflectors in their different stages of their life and where we go, is that it's naturally within us that ability to kind of like flick that aura up and protect ourselves from getting too caught up. But sometimes, particularly if reflectors have had kind of a lot of trauma, or potentially, they haven't had the most supportive experiences of themselves, it's almost like the walls are down. So it's like things get in a bit more and things affect them. But what I find is when I work with reflectors, for example, and start talking about, really knowing that that's part of what you can do and you can flick that up, you can kind of step into that. It's almost like that conscious choice allows it to be more resilient. However, when we are somewhere for long amounts of time, let's say we're somewhere where there's a lot going on and it's not necessarily nice energy in that. And, we might be able to last for a few hours or maybe even longer in that space. But if we're there for days, it's almost like, little holes come through that. Or like you can't stay resilient to it consistently. That has been my experience. So I know for me, I can feel a lot of things. Like I can be in places where there's just such a depth of, say, emotion, for example, or whatever else that's going on, and you can feel it, but it doesn't. And you can feel it, you can even cry with it, but it's not getting right on in. It's not getting into the core of who I am. And that's a really good way of being able to be that barometer, right? To be able to sense what's going on, but not be impacted by it. But when our defenses are low, sometimes if I'm really tired, or if I am not, I've had a big week, or there's been a lot going on. Like, let's say there might have been trauma in, I don't know, my relationship or in my work environment or something, then I find that I get a little bit more impacted by others more easily. And so I have to consciously work with it to go, no, but I can shake it off quickly. I can let it go quickly if I intentionally do it. And I think that that's something that we've got as reflectors that is easier to do if we know how to use it.
So does that mean like you'll walk into like a party and just be like, whoa, no, I don't want to be here kind of feeling, like without interaction? Or?
Absolutely. And I know that again, my experience, because I've always been a bit experimental with, talking to different reflectors and seeing different potential, different gates and obviously definition in reflectors. And there's some reflectors that I've met that have got a lot more kind of those penetrating gates, like the 39 or the 20, the 20, not the 25. I'm having a moment. The one opposite the 25. Anyway, what's that? 51. That's the one. Some of those gates that are a bit more initiating, or a bit, or there's other gates as well, but they're a little bit more provoking. So their experience, from what I've learned, is that sometimes when they are showing up, they feel a bit more prickly to some people because of that. They're able to kind of poke through in a good way, but a lot of people aren't obviously always ready to feel it. I don't have any of those, but I have a lot of I have 19 in my chart a bit, and I'm just really, really consciously aware of everybody's connection to me. Straight away, like not only the feel of the room, but very aware of that person doesn't know, they probably don't like me much, they're not sure of me, they, and the connection to each other. And so for me, I think as a reflector, I'm always conscious of how is everybody else's relationship to each other, because for me, that's where I sit. So that has been my experience as a reflector, where I show up. It's always that conscious sense of where everyone's at. And other reflectors that I've worked with, that I've spent time with, their version of being a reflector is similar, but a little bit more about who needs to be poked, who needs to be, shown, initiated in a way in their own reflections of what they're experiencing.
Okay. Now, the very first time I met a person who was aware of being a reflector, and I don't know how far she was in her journey or anything, but I was at a human design immersion in Asheville, and a woman came in, and she came into the group, like it was a 3-day event, and she came in on the second day. The first day was a Friday. She probably couldn't get there that day. And when she came in, she asked the person who was leading it, she says, there's a couple things I just want to know because I can't stay here. She's like, in this group is fine. It's all wonderful. That's fine. But I can't be in this building. And I was like, that was she's like, and I just don't stay where it doesn't feel right. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Because even being in the room where she said it was fine, she couldn't be in the building. And I was like, have you ever experienced anything like that? Or maybe she meant she couldn't stay the night there. So she couldn't, because that's where she was supposed to stay. And she didn't feel comfortable sleeping in there. She probably could. So she didn't stay for the third day of the event. But, and I do know that there are energies to land or just whatever that do you feel like you're very sensitive to other types of energetic things?
Yeah, I think I'm extraordinarily sensitive. As an adult, I believe I shut a little of that down because when I was very young, I mean, my mother used to catch me as a very young child sitting up in bed as she walked past, and I'd be speaking in all sorts of different languages, and not earthly languages, let's say. And I remember leaving my body all the time as a young child and being on the roof and looking down and having experiences where they took, during exams, or I'd slow everything down, my hearing would change, my vision would change, and I would have these experiences. They sent me to a psychologist or a psychiatrist or something because they thought there was something wrong with me, but it wasn't. But because of these experiences I had as a young child, I would see when my grandfather passed, he came to visit me with his suitcase, when he, all of this stuff that people didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't have anybody in my life that I could really, it's not that I didn't have anybody, but I didn't know what to ask. I didn't know. And it wasn't scary, but it was a little bit like, I'm not sure how to manage this. I don't know. It feels a little bit scary sometimes. So I shut it down a bit. Now and then I'm open to it. I have some strange things, awarenesses of things, but I do turn it down a bit because I know one day I might open it up again when I'm in the space to deal with it, but right now I'm not. And I know that there are a lot of reflectors I've worked with that are very similar. They see a lot, they feel a lot. Or other presences, whether or not that's across the board, I couldn't say, but certainly I've met a lot of reflectors that have a similar experience.
So when you were learning about yourself through human design. I think about my own journey, and I think about how much I focused on my authority. But your authority seems very overwhelming, right? Like, did you do the whole chart the lunar cycle and look at all that stuff, or did you so how did you go about that?
I tracked the lunar cycle just to see. I had a very interesting experience with it. I always recommend for reflectors to do it because I think it's a really good way to understand. I had a really interesting, every time I felt something different, it wasn't in the tracker. It wasn't to do with the transits. So I tracked it to see for myself what that showed up as. Now I don't need to track it, but I do know that there are times in the month, not always necessarily to do with the moon transits either, but there are times nearly every month that I'll have a day or two where I cannot do anything. I'm exhausted. There are times in the month where I am just switched on and I write and I create and I just, I don't want to do anything else but do those things. There are some things that happen across the course of the month that are really consistent for me, so I kind of lean into them. I can't plan for them as much because, as I said, they're not always aligned with the transits.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay. I don't need to have that I just go with what it feels right. And I know that when that time shows up and I'm really exhausted, I try and honor that, and I try and shift a few things out of the calendar if I can. Sometimes I've got to work through it. But I just try and honor what shows up. The truth is I just try and be as present as I can. I know for me as a reflector, if I can get rid of expectations of myself and things, I know that obviously we work, so there's things that we have to do, all of us have to do. But if I can just honor my time in between and how I show up on those times, I find that is much more of an effective and authentic way to live as a reflector. Otherwise, I get caught up in the mind of the tracking, right? What's going on now? How's this got? What I should be this and I should be, and I'm thinking about it too much rather than feeling into it. So
yeah. My favorite I don't know, mantra or question or thing that I say to myself all the time now is, I wonder what this is here to bring me, or what is this here to teach me, right? Because there's something going on, and just kind of, but then not trying to figure it out. And, that's my open head and ajna, which of course I'm not a reflector, but, so I'm wondering how you wound up starting this college, and how new is that? I don't know that I've heard about that until recently.
Look, it's I started midway through last year.
Okay.
I've been working with a lot of people that wanted to learn, human design in a way that felt they could apply it to their work, they could get the most important information and really feel they could use it. The biggest trouble with us in Australia is there's not a lot of ability to get on and learn human design without having to study it in different time zones. And so to me, that's been the most challenging. I loved learning quantum human design and connecting and all of that. But a lot of the time I missed the connection thing because the time zone was really tricky for me. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of that. So that's where it started with. I wanted to create something that really honoured Australians on Australian time zone. And that's really where it came from. I also, as I said, having been a teacher, I wanted to make something that was very, you come with me on a journey and we stay together, and it's structured learning. I get a sense about what's right to let out each week, and we build upon it. So that's really how that journey progresses. And we have these beautiful bonds and friendships and relationships as we go through it, so that we can create community here. That's what I feel has been lacking, particularly in Australia, is we're all starting to get really excited about human design. There's certainly more knowledge of it, but we haven't built that beautiful community that we, that for example, you have over in the States, and certain other, European countries have really got a big presence in human design. So that's where that came from. We needed something that could, accommodate those that really could only work on Australian time zones.
So is it mainly for people who want to learn how to do readings and certify, or is it for, what's involved in it?
It's both. The journey is really self-exploratory, but going through all the information that you can either do. So I have a lot of women that just want to use this information for their family and and integrate it and want to, you know, improve themselves, and others who want to build it into their business, some that want to do some readings as well. It's a real mixed bag, but it's a supportive journey. So they stay with me for a year after the course, and I just help them along the journey. I try and be supportive. I try and keep it small scale, because it's really about me wanting to support, and that's really where I've gone with it. So I've got some that have certified already from the first group that came through. You know, some of them are integrating into the work that they're doing. Some are going to try and just do readings as a side piece, or as a you know, but slowly on their journey. You know, just take it slowly, not necessarily to kind of dive straight in, and because it's an experiment, isn't it? It's the opportunity for them to apply what they've learned and in a supportive environment.
Yeah. So how much? So are you the only instructor in this college, or right now? So it's your
at this stage, yeah. At this stage, there's a few things that may happen. As I said, I when the timing is right, when things shift, they potentially will, and they'll evolve. But right now, this is where it's the focus is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's exciting. So is that the majority of your time now, or are you still doing personal readings, or?
It's the majority of my time. I still do readings, but I have more of limited spaces for those. I do, you know, I still like particularly when a reflector comes and I really want support, I always find I need to make room, because there's reflectors. There's definitely more of us being awake now and aware. But usually reflectors don't necessarily need to learn so much. They just need a bit of guidance on their journey so they can go and do their own thing.
Why do you think they don't need to learn so much?
It's not that they don't need to learn. We all need to learn. But my experience with reflectors, and being one myself, it's almost like we're bringing out the awareness within the reflector if they've reached a certain point in their life, as in they're not kind of caught up, they're reasonably in a good space. It's almost like we're tapping in and releasing something for them to be on their own journey. I find it very hard to teach reflectors in the same way I might teach other types. Because I must admit there's a little similarity sometimes with projectors, but it just depends on the projector, in my experience. With reflectors, I find they're kind of already. I always find it hard to share how I experience this, because I almost find there's not quite the right words for it. But if I try and it's almost sometimes like trying to teach a reflector who already has a lot of self-awareness. And it's kind of like they don't want to feel like you're being condescending on their knowledge already, if that makes sense. So it's a little harder to, there's a different approach. And I find reflectors just often need what they need and then they go on their way. They're not necessarily so interested in that supportive journey as much. It depends on where they're at and what they're trying to get from it. I mean, I know for me, there's certain things when I need support, but a lot of the time, I don't. It's like going as a child at school. You know, it's reasonably good with the stuff that we had to learn. But they, you know, at one point they thought I had attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Is that ADHD? Because I'd learn it, I'd get it right now. I'm done. Yeah, I'm done. I'm finished. What else? I'm bored. I'm looking out the window, and so that it wasn't like get it, move on. Get it, move on. So. Yeah, that's kind of probably where I'm going with that. Not every reflector, but I've met a lot of reflectors that have been in that, shown up like that. Well, they need a lot of support if they're in a very conditioned place.
Yeah. So, and I think, you know, I've often contemplated, you know, like when you have the openness in all the centers, there's a tendency for people to think that that's going to be the same for all reflectors, right? But obviously you have different gates and different profiles and different ways of connecting and experiencing all those things. So do you feel like the profile plays an even bigger role maybe for the reflector types, or is it just different?
Well, it it's important because it gives us clues as to our difference. I don't know that it's more important for us than anyone else, but it does make a difference to how we show up and how we might experience our journey. And so I find usually if I'm working with, sometimes I work with the reflectors over a long period of time, and usually they're very capable. I'm more just giving them information that helps guide them on their own awakening and their own journey, like we would with anyone that's had a lot of life experience and has, got their own self-awareness already. But what I find is really useful information for reflectors is the environment, the determination, looking at that, that right place and that supportive. It's almost like I find that that's really useful for reflectors, because if a reflector's really caught up, let's say in conditioning, overwhelmed, not able to understand that aura, that resistant aura, they're not quite at that place. Sometimes they're in a space that's just, they're so bombarded and overwhelmed with the wrong energy or the wrong people that it's very hard to find yourself in that noise. So by understanding, how they take things in, how they digest life, things, food, and how they show up in an environment that's supportive for them, they tend to get to a place that gives them a bit more room and a bit more spaciousness to show up, to feel into what's the right way of, or correct way of showing up.
Yeah. I always struggle with how to approach those sorts of things, that it doesn't feel like you're going after them with the mind, right? Like this whole idea of like, I know my environment is narrow valleys. So it's been really helpful to understand some of the aspects of that, and to know, that's why I always wind up chatting with people in big environments, because I love the acoustics of all the stuff going on, but the intimate close-up connection. So I'm the one who's always talking in class or at the movie or whatever, because that's just, plus I'm Chatty Cathy, right? But that whole part of narrow valleys. And so, but so many times people with the going at it with their mind, they're like, oh, well, I need to go. And there's that saying, you shouldn't be outside in the nature, the escape of the narrow valleys or whatever, but they'll approach it from a sense of mind. And I think that when we are navigating through our strategy and authority and making aligned decisions, we'll notice that we wind up in those kind of correct environments, right? But yet at the same time, I do know, as I've made a conscious awareness a conscious attempt to be aware of the fact that I'm direct light determination, and thinking, oh, maybe I shouldn't really be eating this at 8:30 at night, but I still do sometimes, and then just observing afterwards how I felt. But to know that part, but not navigate from the mind to do that part, but instead just make decisions that feel aligned, So
absolutely. And I think that's the thing. You can't. You the moment you get caught up in I should or I shouldn't, then it defeats the purpose. I always say to people, experiment with it. See what shows up. You've got to follow your strategy and authority to get there, but see how you feel. Just notice it. Doesn't mean you can't do this, you can't do that. It's just it's about how are you experiencing less resistance. And my example of that is, and I did not do this intentionally, but my environment is internal markets. Life allowed me to create a studio at home. Like I didn't intentionally set it up and start working from home and do a lot of online work and business. But the moment that I was in that internal environment, part of that marketplace, bringing people into my home, whether it's online or actually physically, it was like, as a reflector, I had far more energy than I used to. I can do this sort of work obviously also because it feels good, but I used to travel for work. I was like the external markets, right? Out and about. I was able to do it pretty well. I enjoyed it to some extent, but there's something that didn't feel sustainable in it. Where now that I'm in the right environment, it's almost like I have more access to energy. I can push a little further without getting burned out. I can do more. So it's really, to me, the moment we get caught up in the mind, I think we start overthinking it. We're all overthinking way too much. And it's just trusting it. I have no, as I said, I don't get caught up in the mind of anything I should or shouldn't be doing in the future too far. Like I really just, I don't know whether I'll be doing this in a year, in 5 years, in 10 years. I probably will, but I don't know. Who knows what's going to show up? And I love that. I love that potential surprise about where things are going to show and turn and be, and just keep following what feels good.
Right. And that sounds so frivolous in some ways, right? It really is freeing, though. And it is really how we get out of our own way. And I think about things like, we had this little glitch with the time change or whatever, and old me, even a year ago. Yeah, I'm pretty sure even a year ago, I would have been like, oh, what are people going to think? I had it scheduled at this time and da-da-da. Well, there was, for those who aren't aware, there was a glitch with the scheduling software where when the time changed, it updated a different wrong, whatever. So we're an hour doing this an hour later. And I haven't even said this, but the other thing that I've realized at some point, if anyone's watching this, they might have seen me go like this, when all of a sudden I realized I had not hit the record button before we started to do this, but we were far enough in that I realized, well, we're just going to have to hope I can get it off of Facebook and have not as great of a video again. But I did it once before. It's like all these things as things change. But in the past, I would have let those things freak me out, right? And it would have like totally, grabbed a hold of my mind and not let go. And now I'm just like, it's happening for a reason, and something's going to come out of this that's meant to come out of it. And hopefully you and I will still look lovely in the reduced quality video that I'll have to put out for my YouTube video, but mostly it will be about the audio, and that will be fine. So anyway, now I forgot where we even started with that, but it was something you were talking about with that whole idea. So,
well, I think it's also just about being free and flowing. It's how much healthier is it for us when we don't hold on to that resistance, right? We kind of go, well, this is how it is, and we're going with it, we're flowing with it. I think I noticed that for me. I used to hold on to a lot because I had, I've got a lot of expectation of what I feel things should be if I really tap into it. Like everything's got to be perfect, but I love that, most of the time I don't get caught up in that. I just kind of let it be and get the essence of it. I think that's the most important thing, right?
Yeah. So, I don't know if anyone has any questions for Amber, but, we've got about 10 minutes left or so. So if anybody does, now would be a time to put it in the comments. But, with the time being off, I'm sure, some of them might show up in the comments after when people are watching the replay also. But so I also just wanted to back up a little bit in your process. One of the things I like to ask people about is what was the part that shocked you the most about your design, or really,
shocked.
I don't even know if shock is the right.
No, I know what you're saying, but something that was like really. I think it shocks anybody that reads that they've got to wait a month to make decisions. That really is the like, whoa, what? I don't have a month. I grew up with manifestors, so like I need it now.
Oh, your parents are manifestors?
Well, my mother and my grandfather, who both lived with me, and were hugely influential in my life. My father was a generator, but those two were very pivotal in my upbringing. But yeah, I think that was the hardest thing to get my head around and to understand. At first, I thought I had to wait a month for everything. But obviously, we talked about that it's not necessarily the case for everything. But I think being a reflector, I think at first it wasn't so much shock, but I just realized that there's not a lot of, and I've probably said this a lot of times, so I don't want to kind of say the same stuff, but there wasn't a lot of information around that made me felt, well, that feels right. And unfortunately, people would try and share with me what it meant to be a reflector from what we've learned and what we know. And they were doing the best job that they could, but it still was like, still doesn't quite feel right. And I think for me, it's partly why I wrote my book, was just me about going, what is it? What else do we need? What else is it that helps us understand ourselves? Because, then you look for reflectors, right? Who else is a reflector? And it's really hard to find.
Yeah, there's Sandra Bullock, right? Isn't she one of the ones?
Yeah.
She's the one everybody pulls out. Like, she's the one, when I did an event and I had people that I was putting up, and I'm trying to remember who I wound up using, because I didn't use her because I decided I didn't, because of the group I was doing with, I had more spiritual people, like, my generator was Marianne Williamson, and my projector was, I think, Wayne Dyer. And manifesting generator was Louise Hay, and I'm trying to remember who the reflector was that I had. I can't remember now. But
I'm trying to think of who I use. I've forgotten off the top of my head, but I do have some famous reflectors that I was using. Can't remember. Anyway, can't remember. But there are some others out there now. But it is hard. Like, even just even what I would find is, as reflectors, we're inconsistent in ourselves, right? Sometimes we show up and we can be present and we can share, and sometimes we go away. So it's very hard to go to someone and reliably get information. So I found that was kind of the struggle. It's like, I really want to talk to somebody about this, but again, didn't really have anyone else to talk to at the time that felt that I could really ground in and understand myself. So that was part of that journey, I think, and I know now what's that?
Aren't any major human design teachers or authors that are reflectors either. I have another one scheduled. I think he might be in the beginning of June. There's a gentleman named Roger Campbell who's a reflector. And so he's going to be on in June. So that's me having 3. And, that's a really high percentage, considering that would mean I would have normally talked to 300 people by now, by the time I get that many. But, right? Because you're one person.
Yeah, absolutely. With reflectors, we are definitely more visible out there. There's definitely more around, definitely more wanting awareness, which I think is great. I think this is a really important time for us to get that awareness. Because, Ra used to say, when anybody starts to be aware of their design and starts to be more self-aware in this space, that's when the reflectors will become useful, because they'll be able to turn to the reflector and say, am I going the right way? Or, that temperature gauge feeling. So
let's talk about that a little bit, that barometer factor. Like, how is that showing up for you in your life, where you are the barometer?
Look, every part of my life. If I'm at a family, let's say I'm at a big family gathering, and people want to make it a good experience, for example, and maybe it's not a good experience, or they want, as a reflector, you can almost sense and experience what needs to happen to make this a good experience, or where there's discomfort, or where there's, and so usually as a reflector, you can be, I always say, actually, I'm going to just pivot to giving you an example of what I find a reflector's role is really good. Let's say you have a party, or I have a party here, and we've got lots of people coming over, and I'm the host. I'm best not to be the host who's also cooking and doing all of that, because if I'm busy with all of the bits, getting the food ready and all of, then I'm going to be drained and exhausted and focused in that. I'm better to be the host, that we've got other people doing the cooking and all of that, and we open the door and, hey, Gillian, and hey, Kathy, and hey, Bob, come on in, and this is Fred, and Fred's from here. The reflectors are really good at sensing what people need to keep connected and what to keep things flowing. And so if we're able to be fully present and not exhausted and drained from doing too much else, we can be quite a gift in that space. We can be very aware of what's needed and how things are going. I often will have people come to me. Actually, when I used to work, I was a change manager, so it was all the way about, helping people change. You could recognize what was needed. So when you were asked, what do we need? I'm like, this team over here is feeling really unloved. We need to give them some more. This people over here need. So it's about really addressing what's needed. And we can see that. It's almost like we're standing back, as those evaluators, having oversight. But we can't offer that, right? You have to ask us for it. And that's the difference. And the moment we start offering it before it's asked for is when we come up against resistance. So I've learned often I just don't say anything. I show up. I'm very aware. I notice. And if someone wants to know or has the experience of what that's about, they'll ask. And if they don't, they're not aware. They're not ready.
Projector, huh?
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. That I think. Well, so the other thing I wanted to talk to you about your design is this incarnation cross of the four ways. I read the description that Brynja Magnuson does in her book. Brynja, I don't know if you're familiar with her Incarnation Cross book, but she really talks about how there's these 18-year cycles where you just kind of shift to the next gate, and it's so different than any other cross that I've done. And I'm wondering how, especially with, so here you have this really unique design of reflector, and then you have this really unique chart where you're like pivot, pivot, pivot. And so, since our cross is not just for us, it's what we bring to others. So as a barometer, when people interact with you, they can often take a 90-degree turn, right? And do you find that to be true?
Absolutely. I find, and I don't, it's an energetic thing, right? It's not an intentional thing. But, and sometimes, as I said, it's just showing up. It's just showing up. I've had people go through incredible shifts just because I've been there. I've just energetically held space. And I think that's the journey. That's part of what it's about. And also it's different than it was, right? So through those 18-year cycles, it's different now than it was the last 18 in some way. It's just a slightly different focus.
Yeah. It's so interesting when you start to really look at how different phases are, geared, and everything is happening for us, right? It's all, everything is happening, even if it sucks in the moment, it's happening so that we can expand, right? And we find our next best life.
And I can really feel I'm coming into that Chiron return, and I can really feel that energy. I can
When's your Chiron return? Do you remember?
Not for 2 years, but I'm close to the beginning of when that starts to shift. So I can feel, it's almost like I can feel it on the horizon, just starting to I'd explain it. But there's a real connection to that shifts and shaping, and sometimes it's just I don't try and intellectually work it out, right? I don't try and get caught up in the head about it. I really don't. I just experience it, and it sort of comes through, and sometimes it gets stuck and sometimes it flows, and it's all you can do.
There's something so wonderful that happens when you stop trying to figure it all out intellectually, right? I mean, I've spent my whole life trying to figure things out and needing to be certain with that open aja, and I'm left angle cross of uncertainty. So, that definitely wasn't the way I was meant to do things. So, but yeah, no, I really, I think I was telling you saying earlier that this year I decided at the beginning of the year, I've been choosing a word every year for the last few years. And this year I chose trust. And I've been just super heavily leaning into trust. And it's been so liberating to just trust. And sometimes other people, don't really like that either. They're like, "Oh yeah, we'll just pretend everything's going to be okay." And I'm like, "You can pretend, but I don't have to," And it's like, that doesn't mean you don't do anything. You don't work. You don't, make choices that are in alignment. But knowing that if you make the wrong choice, it's for a reason that's going to be for the ultimate better.
Absolutely.
Better good.
Absolutely. Better good. No, I hear what you're saying. It is better good.
Right? Better good. Right. Okay.
But I find that holding, like that trust is like you're not holding on to attachment to the outcome, which I think is the beautiful thing. You're just allowing. I love that.
Right.
I love that.
So it doesn't look like we have any questions, but Ellen Hefty did say that H.G. Wells was a reflector. So there's at least one there for us.
Yes. Thank you. Absolutely.
Yeah, and at some point I'll have to message or put in the comments. I'll look up as soon as we're done. I'm going to have to look up who the reflectors that I use.
My favorite new one that I found out a little while ago was the in Game of Thrones, the dwarf, the beautiful. Anyway, I can't remember his real name. I do have it somewhere. Peter Dunkridge. That's it. Just came.
Okay.
You may or may not know him, but there was
another. I was thinking that you being a reflector and a 1-3 probably made you a fantastic actress, because the 1-3 is going to do all the work to investigate and know how to really live the character. You're going to do the things and see what works and what doesn't work, and then have this ability to feel what's needed. Yeah, it sounds like that would have been a really cool thing. I'm kind of surprised that
I won lots of awards. I really, I was left. I lots of things happened, but they said that they thought I was going to be. I went to the same school as Margot Robbie, and when I went back, they were surprised that I wasn't doing it not as well as her now. Obviously, she's doing it basically now. But that was where they projected me. But again, it's the consistency. It's the consistency.
Yeah. You miss it sometimes though, like just for fun, or no?
Yeah, sometimes I'll go back and do a little bit of a stage show or something now and then.
Yeah.
But maybe I'm a bit less busy and more just able to integrate it more again.
So is there a way that people, if they want to work with you, what's the best way for people to reach out to you, and what specifically are you doing? You said you got your college and you're doing readings, but
yeah, look, at the moment, my main focus is with the college and I do readings. I've got a few other things happening. I'm actually in the middle of doing some major changes, but that's sort of in the next few months. But generally at the moment, that's my focus. My website, changeyourway.com.au. Again, that'll eventually change, but that's the working.
Change Your Way?
Yeah, so Change Your Way, all together.
Okay.
.au. That's where most of my information is. I'm doing even a little retreat this year. I know that's not even viable for most people over in a different country.
You got your design retreat in Australia, right? And when is that?
That's in August.
In August. Okay. Yeah, well, maybe somebody needs a nice excuse to go to Australia in August.
I'm going to spend some time.
So that's your winter then, right?
It's our winter. It's a beautiful time of year, though.
Yeah.
It's not. Okay. We're not cold. It's a lovely time. It's enough. It's cool enough to have, sit outside and have a fire and, feel a little bit cool. But it's. I don't live in a place that's very cold, so it's actually my favorite time.
Awesome. Well, thank you. That sounds really cool. We'll put all that stuff in the show notes and in the comments and stuff. So every week we share stories of how my guests have come to understand themselves in a more loving and empowering way through the lens of human design. How you think and speak about yourself matters. Human design can show you the reframe of not only your own story, but the story you tell yourself about your relationships. If you're ready to start living a better story, I'd love to help guide you through the process of fully embodying who you came here to be. I invite you to follow Real Human Design Stories on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform, and I'd love so much if you could take a moment and give me a 5-star review if that feels aligned. To work with me directly, you can set up a free discovery chat at kathybashanko.com. Thanks so much, Amber. It was great talking to you. So, peace out, everybody.